Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of you, and peace out to the rest of you. Hit the share button because the message is important to the messenger. Let me start by welcoming my three newest members of the Buy Me a Coffee page, the Jet Black Air Lounge. You know who you are. The post is already giving a shout out to you in the lounge. It's only in the first class lounge. That's the only place where your initials are mentioned. I welcome my subscribers, or rather I should say my flyers, when they join, but I don't put the full names unless they request that. I'll do initials or nicknames or something that allows them to know who they are, but others do not be able to pry into their privacy. This is where I go ahead and that's why I put some information that is not really readily available here on YouTube about even what the usually giving some sort of insight to what it's like to live and work here, as well as sometimes some information about just my own life here. There's some follow-up to the funny cheating story, but I think I'll also put that only on there. You have a little bit of follow-up from yesterday, but there's not a whole lot since then. But I will probably place a little bit more follow-up on the lounge for business and first class. With that being said, I opened this up because I wanted to give a shout out to S. Jock for coming through on Cash App and supporting like he generally and usually does, and very generously. And I really do appreciate that, as I've stated from the bottom of my black heart and from the depths of my black mind. From him, I get an idea as to what's going on in other parts of the world I don't inhabit. And I want to give a summary of these things now, not focusing on any one, but I want to give a summary of them. Because there is a pattern in this. And I'll tell you what the pattern is that I see. First, I'm going to give you the headlines and what happened in them. In Rwanda, a citizen of China got sentenced to 2 decades for beating a citizen of Rwanda where he was. The Rwandan citizen worked for him, and there was another Rwandan citizen that helped him tie up the worker and beat him. Now, we already know of many instances in which we see Chinese citizens being defiant against local authorities, or just being really insulting against the local culture. In Kenya, in Malawi, in Ghana. While this is happening, Mali has also looked at the Canadian company Barrick, which mines gold, and has said, look, we're going to take some gold from you because you owe $5 billion to the government already. And then they showed up and they took $5 billion. I mean, they showed up and took enough tons of gold to either compensate for the $5 billion or to get it started. And they've been telling the other companies that mine gold, you can work here, but we're going to renegotiate these contracts. And we want a heavier percentage. You don't just take the gold out the country, you keep all the money, we stay poor. That's not how this works. Especially now with the prices of gold being what they are, we want these cuts. While this is happening in Mali and in Rwanda, you all are already aware of two non-Sahel Alliance countries in Africa that are formerly French colonies, also kicking out the French military bases. And you know about the Sahel Alliance nations saying, fit the guck out. But you also have Senegal and Chad, which are not Sahel Alliance nations, saying, yeah, bye. And many Senegalese citizens that were left behind in Senegal have said, well, now what do we do? Because we work for the French military base. What's next for us? Many of us are going to hear something like this and say, well, I mean, it's kind of like some of our own people working for a demand and then we kick them out. And you're like, well, what do I do? Well, stop working for the man. Some of us see it as being that simple, but think of it like this. Imagine you got a government job and it pays. And then the government starts to say, you know what, we're a white nation and we're going to focus on white folks first. We don't have any reason to pay you anyways. Well, we know of one particular demographic within our genetic race that's facing that already. It's just not a lot of the men. So this is a parallel that's going on. Parallel sort of a shift in the attitude in the Caribbean and, well, in the diaspora in general, in the New World, in the Americas, the black sectors of the Americas. And the shift in the attitude is we can work with someone, but it's got to be even Steven, it's got to be fair, and we're not taking subordinate positions to. That is, unless, of course, you're taking on the responsibilities commensurate to the benefits that you're going to get. We ain't working hard in these mines anymore, figuratively or literally, and you just walk off with a big ass percentage. Screw that. It's gotten to the point that the president of Venezuela named Maduro, and I forgot who exactly it was. Well, it was Maduro that said this. He said that his nation and Brazil should liberate Puerto Rico from the United States. Now, technically, legally, Puerto Rico could one day vote for independence. They're not a state yet. That's irreversible. Statehood would make them irreversibly a part of the U.S., but right now they're a territory that could go either way. But what would embolden Maduro to say something like this? Especially when Trump won an election where you got two things that would embolden him to say that. Number one, you got the statements that Trump himself has made. Trump himself has sat up and said, well, look, it's a problematic island. He didn't want to aid them when he was president and the hurricane ripped through them. But now he wants to join or annex Canada and Greenland. And he calls Canada's border with the U.S. an artificial line drawn on a map, but Mexico's border with the U.S. is real and true and needs to have a wall built up. Well, he's right about the border between the U.S. and Mexico needing to be guarded and stabilized. He's also right that the Canadian border is an artificial line drawn in the sand. What he does not realize is that both statements actually apply to both borders, not because of the reasons that he said them, but because they are borders, period. Borders are artificial lines drawn on maps, unless they are designed to also follow rivers on maps, like the Rio Grande, for the part of the border that it makes, but the rest of the U.S.-Mexico border does not run along the Rio Grande, so what does that make it? An artificial line drawn in the sand. Or an artificial line drawn on somebody's map, on paper, like the Canadian border. Part of which actually, at least, is based on the Great Lakes. Again, natural things that would show up on a map, therefore making the border easy to see. So you see, In other words, he sees half a coin when he's looking in one direction, another half of a coin when he's looking at another direction. Well, what Trump is pretty much saying is, listen, even if you don't like it, white folk, we gonna stick together. And then he looks at these folks that ain't white, not because of what they've done, and then he says, you all stay over there. So Trump's own attitude towards Puerto Rico for racial reasons and linguistic reasons, along with the fact that the rest of the nation is looking differently at the United States, shows you why Maduro would feel emboldened to say something like this. But what is part of the reason for that? Well, keep in mind that there are revolutionary elements that are anti-colonial and anti-imperialist in Latin America. They may not be pro-black, and I'm not going to give them credit for that. And then there are actually pro-black elements in these societies too. That does also exist, but I'm not saying that that's what happened here. But there's an anti-imperialist element that's still there. That's stronger than the pro-black elements in Latin America. And that's what you were hearing, emboldened partially by these African nations taking stances against Chinese citizens that get violent, as well as taking stances against France and saying, you can fit the guck out. While this is happening, you see this common shift going on across different parts of Africa. Now, here's the thing. Nigeria is dealing with some of its corruption. It has an agency that is responsible for policing corruption and investigating it and arresting people they can arrest for it. But here's the kicker. They had to arrest first the agency had to arrest first some of its own officers for missing property. So that shows that what Nigeria is infamous for, which is corruption, is something they're at least willing to try to tackle. So there's this shift in their attitude. The fact that they're even willing to say, hey, Tinubu's corrupt, tells you something. That's their leader. That's the head of state of Nigeria. Now, some say, well, are you just drawing lines in between different things? No. See, and this is why I thank S. Jock. He comes through on Cash App, but then he sends me these links. And what I tend to do is, I have to do it because of my schedule anyway. I look at the links in blocks. I look at them with each other so that I get a bigger context. In other words, I sort of zoom out. Then I read the links. At the same time that this is happening, do you know what is going on in Palestine? They're resisting, they're fighting, they're blockaded, and I don't know everything that's going on. I'm sure that the suffering is far worse than what I've heard about before. It is pretty bad. It bothers me, it bothers my wife. I don't tell Arabs that I feel anything, but it bothers the hell out of us. You hear about it, you know what, you're human, but I'm bothered also by the suffering in the Congo, Mozambique. I'm bothered by stories of suffering that are so many and so numerous, they run together in my head and I can't remember which story comes from which part. Not because I see all of Africa as the same, but simply because the stories just are so, there's so many. But here's the kicker. Palestine is experiencing its own internal political rift. Now, I knew that you had the Palestinian Authority on one side and you had Hamas on the other side. Let me tell you what I didn't realize. You have other groups as well. They're smaller, but you got other groups. Now, think about this. You got a resistance movement against some imperialist, white supremacist Zionists. Does that sound familiar? But they themselves are not united in terms of how to fight them. Does that sound familiar? Well, did we not, and have we not had all the way up until now, different groups with different strategies? And while we don't hate each other per se, we still perceive a lack of unity, and that lack is real, but we perceive ourselves as being more divided than what we actually are. Take a look at Palestine. Oh, they're actually divided. Hamas and the PA are about to be more at each other's throats than they could possibly be at the throat of the oppressive government that is over all of them and don't like none of them. So there are some times where we actually are to be envied, not only for how we are biogenetically, but also politically speaking. Africa, after standing up to the Chinese who dared to get violent, are now telling France, you can fit the guck out, you can kiss mine. Don't let the doorknob hit you where the good Lord split you. Bye. You have no more military presence here. 5 states that we know of so far, all of them, of course, French speaking, because that's why France would have military bases there, their former colonies. But they're pretty much saying that you can fit the guck out. And Chad is pretty much saying, well, we'll be a little bit nicer about it, but understand this, you tick us off, and we're going to treat you the way that the Sahel Alliance and Senegal treat you. Because that is what you deserve. We're going to be a little bit nice about it. You appreciate that, and maybe we will continue working with you in some other ways, but your military is going to fit the guck out here. Go on, move now. A lot of the rhetoric that we have had as Black folks is changing right now as I record this, as I upload this, as you hear this, as you hit the share button. We're not that disunited. We're not that at each other's throats all the time. We're not actually more disunited than other races are. That's not what it is. We just don't have a natural bias. I should say natural, but we just don't have a bias against other groups of people for not being as dark as us unless we learn it. Whereas they have this bias, it's not natural, but they think it is, against us because we're darker. And that's why they seem to us to be united. No, they're just willing to cooperate in order to not become us. To not have us over them and to not become us and to not look more like us. That's what it is. Now, if you're a Passport Growth or SYSBM or IBMOR, or you don't use any of these acronyms, I want you to understand that when you're looking at places to go, you got to stay abreast of these as much as you can. You got to be an expert on international news. You can't remember all of that. Too many countries, too many factions, too many movements. But you try to zoom out like I did to get some idea as to how our relationship is going to be with the outside world, outside races, and even with each other within the race, but across nationalities. That's what we're really doing. You got to keep track of this. And you got to understand how you represent. You don't have a choice in that matter. You got to understand how you represent both your nationality within the race and then the race itself as a whole. You got to understand that. And one of the things I love about belonging to the faith community to which I belong, and I thank God I belong to it, but one of the things I love about it is that the Black folks in this faith community tend to get along very well and work together very well with each other. Muslims that are Black, generally speaking, do tend to do pretty well together. I mean, Muslims. I'm not talking about another religion and they say that it is, but we tend to get along pretty well with each other. And in terms of how we're going to represent, well, we already have the rules that determine how we're allowed to represent ourselves, let alone anybody else. And so therefore, those of us that follow those rules don't misrepresent us or represent us badly. And then those who don't follow the rules usually are either not identified as belonging to the faith community, or everyone knows, okay, he's not following the rules of his faith. So we have the rules and we tend to not disobey them to the same extent as some others that are more associated with the faith community by stereotype, i.e. the Arabs. Arab men smoke. They're not mean. I'm not telling you that. It's not that. No, I'm not trying to tell you that Arab men in general are just evil, but when it comes down to the self-discipline you have to have, sorry, they don't exercise it the way we do. They are heavy smokers on average. They think it makes them look more manly. They still have that kind of mindset. You and I would look and say, what would make you think that, bro? They do. I can't explain it. Not interested in explaining it either. Not my job to explain that. But I know that that's what it is. So when they go to other places, they aren't even on their P's and Q's about how they're going. It's like this. If they go somewhere where the people are not white, they don't think about how they're going to represent Arabs. When they go somewhere around white folk, then they start thinking how they're going to represent Arabs. That's true. When they go to Europe, they don't want to give Arabs a bad image. Now, if they go to Africa or they go to other parts of Asia, like they go, especially if they go to Southeast Asia, if they go to Thailand or the Philippines or, they go to those areas, they don't tend to act up too much in Malaysia and Indonesia, but now there are parts of Indonesia where they're going, buy a wife and then just leave. And the women know what's up. So they're not deceiving them, but there are places where, in other words, there are places where they go to get their freak on. And they don't particularly care how they represent. They're drinking, they're smoking, you know who they are, you know where they're from, and they ain't hiding none of that. They don't care. But they go to Europe and they try. They try. They go to Switzerland and they try to behave themselves. They don't want to make themselves look bad. We're like, look, you know what? We tend to be deeper thinkers than that in general. But you have to understand what's happening somewhere so that you can decide to what you want to contribute. See, right now, understand this. That's why this has to be about more than just catching up on missed sexual opportunities of youth while the women that were nice looking were just spinning the block as early as 13. It's not just that. That is about avoiding the bad deals to which these Westernicians want to limit you. Yeah, it's about avoiding these things. But the whole idea of any of these acronyms and the passports around which they're centered, so to speak, is actually how you are building your life, your entire life. I've already told you, if you want to sit up and try to make up for lost time sexually, your best bet is to go somewhere where you can marry legally and you can afford to marry more than one. That's your best way to go about that. That's how you do it. You're not going to sit up here and be able to out-fornicate these women. It's not something you can do. Likewise, the amount of money that you can decide to just give away to women if you wanted to is going to exceed the amount of money they could possibly get from one man or give to other men if they were going to waste it. They can't outspend you per se. They can't out-earn you. They can't even, they might be able to out-earn you, but they can't outspend you. And unless they're charging and selling the box, they really can't even, unless they're charging and selling the box through OnlyFans, I should say, they can't even earn more than you could possibly lose. So what they want from you, you could easily just give large sums of it out to women if you wanted to, if you just wanted to teach them a lesson. Now, you'd be injuring yourself doing it. But the point I'm making is that there's something you could do as well that would drop you. The difference is that it's easier for you to drop your value as a guy. But the point I'm making is that you cannot afford to sit up here and try to out-fornicate these broads. Stuff like that is the reason why it is that Soulfyah now is not what it used to be for many of you. You always sit up and say, the passport pookies ruined it. And now they're ruining Pattaya. Oh yeah, there's a man who was saying, I'm not going to say which social media platform, but I saw he's been saying on a social media platform that his homeboy right now has a YouTuber's so-called girlfriend in Pattaya at his house. He's like, man, my homeboy has this chick at his house right now, but she's supposed to be this YouTuber's girlfriend. He went to where she works, met up with her. He's like, yo, what's happening at the end of your shift? Now her shift is over. She at my man's house. He tapping that. That's Pattaya for you. So you got to remain focused. And unfortunately, what that's going to mean is that if you're a Passport Bros or you are SYSBM or you are IBMOR, you're going to have to get in touch with each other, form a core from which further memberships have to be validated. That's what's going to happen. It could come in the form of souvenir cards you print up for each other. It could come in the form of souvenir passports. I've suggested having that done before. It can come in these forms, but I'm telling you now that we're going to have that because you got a bunch of Passport Pookies calling themselves Passport Bros. You got Passport Joes calling themselves that. You got people don't know that there's also SYSBM and IBMOR as well. That's what you're dealing with right now. And what their focus is pretty much just kitty. That's their focus. Bruh, if you go to Thailand to live or to visit, either way, if you go there, there are many things to enjoy in life. And not just fornication is still dangerous. Still is. But the other thing too is you have to keep in mind is that if you were going to places with a focus on getting draws, sexually catching up, which you can't do with Westernisha, that's your focus, then as political events begin to take shape, you could be completely unaware of them and blindsided. Now, I could sit up here, read these headlines, and then read the news stories later or listen to them. I could do that and still be blindsided by something else because you can't keep track of everything. But if I was sitting up here just focused on acquiring wives, not even fornicating, but if I was just focused on acquiring more wives, trying to get back at these Westernicians, then I could be easily blindsided by things that would change here. Don't make that mistake, gentlemen. Don't do that. Keep abreast of what's going on. And whatever acronym you use to describe yourself and your mission, make sure that you don't soil that reputation and misrepresent that with a focus that's only below the belt. Don't do that. Remember, a calm lifestyle is actually very important. What is calm, healthy, and clean and warm for us, because we're tropical people, are very important. When you get these things together in a land where you can have a family, a good wife at least, then don't worry. The marital bump and grind over time, if you give it time, will more than compensate for whatever slight you feel you had to suffer when we were younger, and Boom Shika and Bonquisha and Randy Rosario were jumping in cars with drug dealers 10 years older than them and older than you. Don't lose the proper focus in your mission. Please don't do that. Because I stated before, Thailand ain't gonna stay what it is. And we're already seeing that Pattaya is not staying what it was. That's already being the case. It's already taking shape. I haven't been to Thailand even, but I know about that because I know those who were there. Come on, man. You got a lot of brothers that moved to Pattaya because that's where other brothers were living, and they're not just mongers, but now things are going to change for them negatively because of something they didn't do. Remember to zoom out in your view. Do not miss the forest for the trees, and don't miss the trees for the forest. I hope this helps. As always, thank you. Black heart, black mind, black heterosexual, non-select. Well, black heart, black mind, black out. Black heterosexual, non-select male power, because they don't like it in Black Patriarchy until extinction of Judgment Day. As always, thank you for flying with jet black air. What a phrase, jet black, is also a verb. Keep jetting black with us till the wings and the wheels fall off. Gender justice forever. And I advise you all to not let S. Jock carry all the weight by himself on Cash App. Until next time.